Jake Calloway, Maria Linton, Leon Bartlett, and Simon Rourke appeared to run an ordinary cheese shop in Manchester. But behind the shelves they were smuggling over 1 million pounds of cocaine. One tiny mistake would unravel everything, exposing the audacious empire hidden in plain sight. Please subscribe for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. Jake Calloway didn't run his operation alone. Behind the friendly smile and the neatly stacked cheese wheels, a small but deadly gang worked tirelessly to keep the business running smoothly. Each member had a unique skill, and together they formed a team that was almost impossible to trace. Maria Linton, the logistics genius, was the brains behind the movement of the contraband. She coordinated shipments across borders, arranging transport routes that seemed ordinary on the surface but were actually carefully planned to avoid any suspicion. Maria had an almost obsessive attention to detail. She memorized schedules, knew the routines of customs officers, and understood every loophole in the supply chain. For her, the cocaine hidden inside cheese was just another puzzle to solve, and she took pride in doing it flawlessly. Leon Bartlett, on the other hand, was the craftsman. A former butcher, he had an uncanny ability to carve hollow spaces inside cheese without leaving a trace. No knife mark, no extra smell, nothing to betray the contents hidden within the creamy layers. Leon had perfected the technique over years, experimenting with different types of cheese until he found the ones that could hold the drugs without being detected. The thick cheddar wheels became perfect containers, and even brie and camembert were carefully adapted for smuggling smaller quantities. Every wheel that left the shop was a work of precision, a silent vessel carrying thousands of pounds of cocaine under the guise of a gourmet product. Then there was Simon Rourke, the quiet enforcer who made sure no one interfered with the operation. He was unassuming at first glance, blending easily with the neighborhood, but his presence was enough to intimidate anyone who might have questions. Simon monitored deliveries, followed anyone who appeared suspicious, and ensured that rivals or informants stayed away from the cheese shop. He rarely spoke, letting his actions communicate threats when necessary, and the gang relied on his vigilance to feel secure. Together, the team operated like a well-oiled machine. Every role was critical, and every step was rehearsed with care. The shipments arrived from mainland Europe, often labeled as ordinary cheese imports. Drivers had no idea they were transporting drugs, believing instead that they were delivering gourmet products. Once the cheese reached the shop, Lion would hollow the wheels, Maria would arrange the logistics, and Simon would watch for any signs of trouble. Even the smallest detail mattered. A slightly misaligned label, a delayed delivery, or a curious passerby could threaten to expose the entire operation. Despite the danger, the gang thrived. The illusion of a simple cheese shop was their greatest weapon. Locals saw only the charming store, the friendly staff, and the tastings that showcased imported delicacies. Nobody suspected that a small circle of criminals had turned cheese into a multi-million-pound smuggling operation. They operated in plain sight, confident that the careful planning, precise execution, and secrecy of their skills would keep the authorities blind. But even the most meticulous plans carry risk, and the gang's dependence on perfection meant that one small slip could unravel years of work and millions of pounds of illicit profit. Despite the gang's meticulous planning, cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed facade. Detective Hannah Forsyth, a seasoned investigator with the UK National Crime Unit, had been tracking unusual patterns in import data for months. Something about the cheese shipments didn't add up. Certain types of cheese arrived in large quantities, far more than the local demand could justify, while others only appeared sporadically, in niche markets that seemed oddly specific. At first, it seemed like a minor anomaly, but Hannah's instincts told her there was more beneath the surface. She began monitoring Jake Calloway's shop discreetly. From the outside it appeared ordinary. Customers came and went, deliveries arrived, and the smell of aged cheese drifted into the street. But Hannah noticed subtle irregularities. Trucks arrived at unusual hours, often in the early morning or late evening, when most businesses were closed. Staff members took unexpected routes when carrying boxes, And Jake himself was increasingly anxious, checking over his shoulder and avoiding conversations about inventory. Each observation seemed minor alone, but when pieced together they formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Hannah's team expanded surveillance. Cameras were set up near delivery routes, and data on shipments was cross-checked with records of local businesses. Patterns emerged that no casual observer would notice. The shop's outwardly calm and charming appearance masked an intricate network of illegal activity. Even the tastings and cheese demonstrations were part of the illusion, creating a sense of legitimacy while the gang moved enormous quantities of cocaine under the radar. Every shipment that arrived from Europe, every wheel of cheese that left the shop, was a calculated move in a game that only Jake, Maria, Leon, and Simon fully understood. The detective began piecing together the gang's methodical system. Leon's skill with carving the cheese, Maria's precise scheduling, and Simon's silent vigilance created an almost perfect criminal operation. Hannah realized that catching them would require patience and a keen eye for the smallest mistakes. Any misstep could provide the evidence she needed. She began mapping the delivery schedules, tracking unusual purchases, and gathering information from local contacts. Slowly, the picture of the gang's operation came into focus, revealing the audacity and sophistication of the scheme. Despite the tension building in the background, life at the cheese shop carried on as normal, or so it seemed. Jake continued to welcome customers with his easy charm. Leon quietly prepared wheels of cheese. Maria orchestrated shipments from behind the scenes, and Simon maintained a watchful presence, ensuring that no one got too close. The gang believed their system was flawless, their attention to detail impenetrable, but Hannah's investigation proved that even the most careful criminals leave traces, and the smallest irregularity could unravel years of planning. Every observation, every note, every recorded shipment brought Hannah closer to a breakthrough. She didn't need a dramatic confession or a tip-off, she only needed one weak link, one miscalculation to expose the entire operation. And as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that the gang's perfect facade might not survive the scrutiny of a detective determined to uncover the truth hidden behind the wheels of cheese. The downfall of Jake Calloway and his gang came not from years of careful planning unraveling overnight, but from the tiniest, most ordinary mistake, something so small that it would have seemed insignificant to anyone else. Leon Bartlett, the butcher-turned-criminal, had carved a batch of cheddar for export late one night, the wheels lined up neatly on the counter. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, hollowing out the cheese and filling it with cocaine, but in his exhaustion, he mislabeled one of the wheels. Instead of marking it with the secret code that identified it as part of the shipment, he accidentally wrote a random number that didn't match any of the gang's records. This simple error was enough to set off a chain reaction that nobody saw coming. The mislabeled cheese was sent out as part of a routine delivery to a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. The cafe was familiar with large cheese deliveries, but its staff had a sense for unusual packages. When they unpacked the shipment, they noticed something odd. The wheel was heavier than it should have been, and the texture seemed slightly off. They didn't know it contained cocaine, but instinct told them that something wasn't right. A cautious employee took a photograph and sent it to the local authorities, who had recently been on the lookout for irregular shipments. Detective Hannah Forsyth received the tip and immediately recognized its potential significance. One mislabeled wheel of cheese, seemingly harmless, was all she needed to begin unraveling the gang's operation. Her team traced the shipment back to Jake Calloway's shop, carefully mapping out each delivery and noting inconsistencies with previous imports. Surveillance was increased, vehicles were monitored, and every employee's movements were logged. Suddenly, years of meticulous planning by the gang seemed fragile, built on the assumption that every detail would be perfect. Inside the shop, the gang remained oblivious to the mistake. Jake prided himself on his flawless system, Maria on her precise coordination, and Simon on his watchful oversight. Even Leon, exhausted but confident in his skills, did not realize the error that had slipped past him. The gang's routine continued as normal. Shipments were prepared, deliveries dispatched, and the cheese wheels moved quietly through the city. Every day, the tension increased, though they had no idea why. But in the back of Hannah Forsyth's mind, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. The gang's overconfidence had blinded them to the possibility of human error, and that one simple mislabeled wheel was enough to expose the hidden network. The operation that had seemed untouchable, operating in plain sight for years, now hung by a thread. A single oversight had turned the tide, and the team's perfect illusion of innocence was about to collapse. As the cafe's report moved through the investigation channels, preparations for a raid began. Hannah knew the gang's methods, their strengths, and their weaknesses. She understood that even the most careful criminals can be undone by a tiny, unplanned slip. What Jake Calloway and his team didn't realize was that the very cheese they considered their greatest weapon had become their undoing. One small, silly mistake was all it took to expose a multi-million-pound cocaine empire hidden behind the doors of an ordinary cheese shop. The early morning mist hung low over the streets of Manchester, as law enforcement quietly gathered near Jake Calloway's cheese shop. The hours of surveillance, careful planning, and patience had brought them to this moment. Every detail had been considered: entry points, escape routes, and the gang's habits. Detective Hannah Forsyth knew the risks. Any sudden movement could alert Jake or his team, but the evidence from the mislabeled cheese had given her the confidence she needed. The gang that had seemed untouchable for years was about to face the consequences of their mistakes. Inside the shop, life continued as usual. Jake moved among the cheese wheels, checking inventory with a nervous precision. Leon was busy carving a new batch, his hands steady but his mind preoccupied with minor errors in packaging. Maria was quietly coordinating an outgoing shipment, unaware that it would never reach its destination. Simon, the ever-watchful enforcer, prowled the back room, scanning for threats with his usual silent intensity. To the gang, everything seemed normal, but the tension outside was palpable. Police officers were stationed on every corner, ready to move at a moment's notice, cameras capturing every angle, and units prepared to block any attempt at escape. The raid began with precision. Officers entered the shop quietly, signaling each other with hand gestures as they swept the front room. Jake looked up, confusion and fear flashing across his face as the first doors burst open. Leon tried to hide the cheese wheels in freezers, frantically shoving them into tight corners, but there was nowhere left to conceal them. Maria attempted to destroy records, shredding papers and erasing digital logs, her hands trembling as the realization set in that it was too late. Simon, the stoic enforcer, made a desperate attempt to flee, but a team of officers blocked the back exit, leaving him with no choice but to surrender. The discovery was staggering. Over 200 kilograms of cocaine were found hidden in hollowed-out cheese heels, alongside hundreds of thousands of pounds in cash. The police were meticulous, cataloging every piece of evidence, knowing the significance of the seizure. The shop that had appeared so harmless to the world was revealed as the nerve center of a multi-million-pound drug operation. Jake Calloway's meticulous planning, Leon's craftsmanship, Maria's logistical genius, and Simon's enforcement had all been undone by a combination of a small error and relentless investigation. As the gang members were handcuffed and led away, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Years of careful work, millions of pounds in cocaine, and an operation that had fooled everyone now lay in ruins. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with shock. People who had once viewed the cheese shop as a charming local business now struggled to comprehend the audacity of what had been hidden in plain sight. Detective Hannah Forsyth watched as the gang was taken into custody, knowing that one small mistake, the mislabeled wheel of cheddar, had made this possible. It was a moment of triumph, but also a reminder of the fragile nature of criminal empires. In a matter of hours, the invisible threads holding the gang together had been severed. The raid was a culmination of patience, observation, and a single stroke of luck. The story of Jake Calloway and his gang would become infamous, a lesson in how even the most careful criminals are vulnerable to human error. What had seemed like a perfect operation, hidden in plain sight behind shelves of cheese, was now nothing more than evidence in a police case, destined to shock the public and serve as a cautionary tale for years to come. The aftermath of the raid sent shockwaves through Manchester and beyond. The neighborhood that had once embraced Jake Calloway's cheese shop as a quaint local business was left in disbelief. People walked past the empty storefront, staring at the dusty windows and faded sign, unable to reconcile the charming image they had trusted with the criminal empire that had been operating behind those walls. For months locals had enjoyed tastings, friendly service and the aroma of imported cheeses, never suspecting that each wheel contained hidden cargo worth over £1 million. The revelation was both shocking and surreal. Jake Calloway, Maria Linton, Leon Bartlett, and Simon Rourke were each held in custody, facing charges that would alter their lives forever. The media seized the story, dubbing it the Cheese Cocaine Gang, and sensational headlines spread rapidly. People were fascinated by the audacity of the operation, how a simple cheese shop had become the epicenter of one of the most sophisticated smuggling networks the UK had seen. Yet behind the headlines was a sobering reality. Years of careful planning, millions of pounds in illegal drugs, and meticulous criminal strategies had been undone by a single careless mistake. One mislabeled wheel of cheddar had set in motion a chain of events that law enforcement could exploit, and the gang had paid the ultimate price for it. For Detective Hannah Forsyth, the case was a career-defining moment. Months of surveillance, analysis, and patience had culminated in the arrest of one of the cleverest criminal operations she had ever encountered. But the case also served as a reminder of the unpredictability of human behavior. Even the most disciplined criminals could falter under fatigue, distraction, or overconfidence. One slip, no matter how minor, could unravel years of planning. Hannah reflected on how her careful observation had turned a small anomaly into a full-blown investigation, proving that in the world of crime, nothing remains hidden forever. The impact extended beyond the gang and the shop. Suppliers, clients, and peripheral associates were questioned, and some were quietly arrested or investigated. The ripple effect showed how interconnected criminal operations could be, and how the collapse of one small link could expose an entire network. Authorities praised the precision of the raid and the strategic patience that led to it, emphasizing that it wasn't just luck, but meticulous work combined with an unforeseen error that had allowed justice to prevail. Meanwhile, the story captivated the public imagination. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail, from the gang's methods to the tiniest mistakes that led to their capture. The narrative of cheese as a vehicle for cocaine, hidden in plain sight for years, struck a chord with audiences fascinated by audacity, ingenuity, and the consequences of human error. The shop itself became a symbol of deception, a stark reminder that appearances can be misleading and that even the most ordinary settings can harbor extraordinary secrets. In the end, the Cheese Cocaine Gang case became more than just a criminal investigation. It became a lesson, a cautionary tale, and a story that would be retold for years. Jake Calloway and his associates had built what they believed to be a perfect empire. But in the world of crime, perfection is fragile. One small, silly mistake was all it took to expose their empire. And in the aftermath, the world saw that even the most audacious schemes can crumble when human error creeps in, turning a hidden operation into a story that shocked a nation.